Welcome to 1000 PS TV. Martin Bauer is on board, which means we're diving into tech. And in this case, I'm a big Harley fan. I absolutely love riding Harleys, even though I know the chassis aren't always top class. So the sportier things are meant to get, the more important it is to invest in the suspension. And I've known for about 15 years now that Öhlins entered the Harley segment. And I think they've done it very, very successfully. We've got two products here, Martin, that you're going to explain to us, shock absorbers and forks. I just want to say up front, I've already outed myself as a Harley fan. I've always really loved riding these quote-unquote lumps of iron simply because I think the engines are fantastic. Those big high displacement motors, that thumping sound. They've got their own unique potato rhythm, and the styling, well, that goes all the way back to the 1940s, and I'm just fully into it and enjoy every bit of it. Even back when I was doing loads of super sport riding, I still absolutely loved hopping on a Harley, and that hasn't changed. I still enjoy riding super sports, and I still massively enjoy riding a Harley. Now, it used to be the case with Harley, and this wasn't just some cliche. They really didn't handle well, and the braking wasn't great either. That's just how it was back then. But it never bothered me because you kind of knew it would wobble a bit when you pushed harder and that you had to brake in advance. It was just something you were aware of. It never put me off. But from a technical point of view, it clearly wasn't the pinnacle of engineering. Not that I cared, to be honest. They've obviously moved with the times, and I think it's been about 10 years now since they introduced a new frame, which is way more stable. I believe it was 65% stiffer than the old one in terms of torsional rigidity. And just from the frame alone, you've now got a much better foundation. The engines have, of course, also become more powerful. Back when I started, I think we had 1340 cubic inch and around 60 horsepower, and now we're well over the 100 mark. The braking has also improved massively, and even in terms of suspension, we've now got this CVO sitting out there, which even comes with an upside-down fork, a seriously beefy one, but there's still room for improvement, of course, because, for example, that upside-down fork out there isn't exactly highly adjustable, and the rear shocks aren't either. And I think it might be the case that over at the factory, they've decided to set things up with a safe baseline setting because the bike weighs nearly 400 kilos and it really does need to sit solidly on the road. You don't want someone fiddling with the setup and suddenly having it wobble all over the place. That would be a disaster. On the other hand, and I think a lot of people who aren't deep into the Harley world don't know this, your average Harley rider is actually pretty competitive. There's this cliche that Harley riders are just laid back and a bit dozy behind the bars, but no, that's not how it is. There's a real sense of competition going on. People are checking whether someone's got a Screaming Eagle kit or not, and it's definitely about who's quicker. And as soon as things move away from that pure freedom and cruising vibe, it's brilliant to have something like Öhlins on hand. Because the stock suspension does a great job for rolling through the countryside, no doubt about it. But the moment you start pushing it a bit, it's definitely no bad thing to have a better suspension setup. And these Öhlins components are absolutely top-notch. There's just no arguing with that. So my first question for you, Martin, is this. Öhlins suspension is available for regular motorbikes, but why should I even bother investing in something like that? What's actually different about it? Because apart from the fact that there's a lot of gold on the outside, I can't exactly see inside. So what are they doing differently that makes it genuinely better?
One of the biggest challenges when it comes to Harley-Davidson, especially from a suspension perspective, is the sheer weight of the entire bike. And when you combine that with very short suspension travel, it presents some very specific challenges for suspension technology. What you want with Harley-Davidson bikes, and this is something everyone looks for, is that low slung stance. You want it to sit low and have that cool laid-back look, and you just don't get that if it's gliding along high off the ground like a stilt walker. That combination is always tricky to manage when it comes to suspension design. Lots of load on the suspension, but hardly any travel to soak it all up properly. And most Harley-Davidson models still struggle with that balance today. As you rightly said, one of the main reasons Harley riders come to us, and there are a lot of them, is to make improvements in terms of stability. And that stability isn't just about the suspension components themselves, the springs and dampers, but the whole chassis. Luckily, there have been some solid updates in recent years, like you mentioned, especially with improved stiffness that's made a big difference. Now, in this RaceLab episode, we're focusing mainly on the Road Glide CVO we've got sitting out back. The aim is to take this already improved chassis and with a proper suspension setup, push the handling another big step forward. The main goals are to enhance stability, increase precision, and especially improve cornering clearance. What we want to find out with this bike is what's possible when you push towards performance. Can it really lean into corners? Can you carry a bit more speed through the bends? That's obviously not the strong point of this kind of machine, but we still want to see how far we can take it. With the road glides, especially in the US, you've got those well-known bagger races where they really push things to the extreme, and it's seriously fascinating to watch. It's genuinely impressive what they can get out of bikes like that. Of course, those machines are often no longer all that suitable for the road. What we want to look at first is how can you take a Road Glide CVO and through suspension tuning, get it to perform well on the road, but also hold its own when you're riding fast, even partly on a racetrack. And that's exactly what we've planned for here with the right kind of suspension components. Like you already said, one issue with the stock suspension is that it offers relatively little travel. That's partly by design, the idea being that the bike shouldn't move around too much. But that brings its own problems. Even on normal roads, it can sometimes lack comfort, because the smaller the travel, the less working range I have to absorb bumps and imperfections in the surface. When the travel is very limited, there just isn't much room to work with, and at the same time, you have to make sure it doesn't bottom out. Sure, I could set it up very soft even with limited travel, but then as soon as you hit a bigger bump or have a passenger on the back, it's going to bottom out constantly. And that ends up feeling just as harsh, even though the suspension is technically soft, simply because you're always slamming into the end stop. That's the real challenge with bikes like this, and it's something that has to be addressed properly. And in this case, we've got two brilliant solutions from Öhlins that help us fit proper, high-quality suspension components. It all starts up front with the fork. And as you said, it's already an upside-down fork from the factory. The issue, though, is that we can't really adjust the stock fork. There's barely any way to tweak preload or damping. And that's exactly where the Öhlins FGRT fork comes in. It's not just an upside-down fork with that elegant coating that reduces friction and already improves response. It's also fully adjustable. Up top, you've got a hex adjuster where you can change the spring preload. And inside there's an Allen key slot that lets you adjust the damping. It's an asymmetrical setup, meaning one leg handles rebound and the other handles compression. Together, that gives you a fully adjustable unit.
Travel-wise, we're looking at just under 120 millimeter, which is slightly more than what the stock fork offers, giving us more options from a suspension perspective, and internally you can tailor the setup to match your specific needs.
That's a really important point when upgrading to something like this. You're also buying a wide range of adjustability. If someone says they want to prioritize comfort, we can set up the internal damping to be softer and more comfort-oriented from the get-go. On the other hand, if someone's riding more aggressively, we can fit it with a much firmer base setting, something that's more performance-focused and precise. And that's the big advantage of Öhlins products. It's the same story at the rear. The stock shocks offer basic adjustability, mainly in rebound and preload. But with the Öhlins equivalent, we've got a fully adjustable system. Down here, you can adjust the rebound by turning this adjuster ring, and the compression is handled via this knob on the reservoir. Now, while we don't have hydraulic preload adjustment or remote adjusters here, we can still fine-tune preload using this threaded collar. And on the CVO Road Glide, access is actually really easy. You just remove the panniers, which takes no time at all. Then you can adjust the preload properly and really dial the rear suspension into your preferences. The Öhlins shock also gives us around 90 millimeter of travel, which is a bit more than the stock unit. And that lets us deal with a wider range of situations, boost comfort, and also tweak the bike's geometry a bit. Because stability on a bike like this isn't just about the chassis and suspension components, it also depends on the riding geometry, on how the bike is set up. And that gives us room to make a few adjustments. Well, for example, setting the bike up slightly more front biased by raising the rear end a bit. That tightens up the steering radius and gives you a bit more performance, helping you hit exactly the kind of ride feel you're after. So those are the fundamentals, the components and the building blocks we're going to install on the CVO to give it a proper upgrade.
At the end of the day, the internal structure, what we've got is a cartridge system with different oil channels, various shims or whatever they're called. And I'm guessing that's got to be different from the stock setup, right? But to be honest, I'm not exactly sure how different.
Yes, absolutely. The damping system here is completely different from the ground up. In high-end systems like this one from Öhlins, we're talking about a full cartridge setup. That means you've got a dedicated damping unit with a proper damping piston, a shim stack, and the ability to build in specific damping settings and different damping curves. Most standard forks, like the ones Harley-Davidson typically uses, usually rely on a very simple two-tube system. Inside, there's just a sleeve with a small hole drilled in it, and that's basically all there is to handle the damping. You can imagine that such a setup is never going to perform anywhere near the level of a proper cartridge system like this, especially one that can be adjusted. And that adjustability is a huge benefit, because let's be honest, even the same rider might be on completely different surfaces depending on the day. One time it might be poor quality back roads, and the next it might be hundreds of kilometers at high speed on the motorway. Those are totally different demands on the suspension. And with a system like this, which has that more complex construction, I've now got the ability to fine-tune it quickly and precisely for whatever kind of riding I'm doing. That's a massive advantage. It gives us, as suspension specialists, much more flexibility in setting the bike up exactly the way the customer wants it. But it also means the customer still has the option later on to make quick adjustments when they find themselves riding under unusual conditions or tackling a different kind of route.
So here's the thing, this CVO really isn't a bargain. You've got to lay down a serious chunk of money. It's a lot, no way around it. So when it comes to the Öhlins parts, I'm guessing you'll be throwing a few more grand on top of that. But in that sense, relatively speaking, it's not quite as dramatic. Do you happen to know the exact prices?
Yeah, all in, we're looking at around 7,000. That includes all the materials and the installation, which obviously isn't something to overlook. But the benefit you get from it is really significant. And for anyone who's already decided to invest that kind of money in the base model, this still makes sense in relative terms. If you're looking to properly optimize the dynamics of the bike, then it's definitely a worthwhile upgrade.
From my own experience, I can say it really makes a huge difference. It's absolutely brilliant. It even feels amazing at low speeds because the suspension responds much more sensitively. In this case, I totally get anyone who decides to go for it, but I also get those who say, I'm fine as it is, I don't ride hard, I just cruise around the countryside. But the moment you start riding a bit more actively, you'll feel the difference straight away. It'll be a real joy. And I'm curious, Martin, because I reckon you're going to push that Harley pretty hard. I'm looking forward to seeing what you think of it, and I bet we're in for some spectacular footage.
Yeah, we've got quite a bit lined up for the upcoming episodes. The plan is to really put this thing through its paces. I'll be getting on it myself to see how it behaves under proper load. Not exactly in full-on bagger race style, but with the setup we've got here, we want to give the Road Glide CVO a real test and find out what this package is truly capable of. Can you ride it in a super sporty way, or are there still weak points? Those are exactly the kinds of questions we'll be answering in the next episodes. And I think it's a pretty interesting topic, especially when it comes to riding a bike like this at higher speeds. There's definitely a big audience for that. We get loads of inquiries from riders who want to ride their Harleys more dynamically, particularly in Germany, where 200 km stints on the Autobahn with bikes like this aren't all that rare. And in those situations, it's just really nice to know the thing stays planted and doesn't start getting nervous. And that's exactly the kind of scenario we want to explore with this project. The next step is to install the components we've got here on the bike. After that, we'll head to the dyno and check out the engine. And then finally, it's time for the racetrack to really push it to the limit and see what happens. All of that will be coming up in the next episodes.
Brilliant. Martin, I'm genuinely excited, really curious to see how this all turns out. For now, a big thank you to all of you for watching. If any of you out there already have experience with Öhlins gear on a Harley-Davidson, please let us know. We'd love to hear about it. And if there's anything else you want to know, just drop it in the comments below. We'll make sure to answer. Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and we'll see you soon. Cheers and take care.